Howdy, folks, and welcome to another day in the Milky Way. Tonight we got a great show for you. We're going to do Buffalo Bill stories. I got this new thing from the Old West, and as you can see, price 5 cents. Must have been from the days of long gone way back. So we're going to check out some Buffalo Bill stories. Who doesn't love a good story? Come on, it's a lot of fun. And so we're going to go to the Wayback Machine, as you know, and we are going to check things out. And as soon as I get this all squared away, we are going to move things around and we're going to get right into the story, because who doesn't know about Buffalo Bill? And there we go. That's how we do it around here. Big as I can get it that way. We can all see what's going on. So, with that said, here we go. And share screen. There we go. And tonight, we present to you Buffalo Bill, Billy Bird's Bonanza. Should we do that one? Ooh. Or was it the other one? Oh, this is the one. We're going to start out with Buffalo Bill's Border King. That's what it is. Sorry about that. I thought it was the other one. Border King. Buffalo Bill's Border King. Who doesn't love this? Buffalo Bill, the Border King. This was the first issue back in the early days. Leap from the Border King, sprang up behind his disguise and made back to back. Yes, Buffalo Bill stories. Original Tales of Buffalo Bill Adventures. May 18th, 1901. Buffalo Bill, the Border King, a story of daring deeds. The author, Buffalo Bill. All right. Running the Death Gauntlet. Will no man in this fort dare run the Death Gauntlet? Bring aid to us. The words rang out sharply, sternly from his lips of Major Frank Baldwin, commander of Fort Advance. In the most trackless territory of Utah, a dead silence fell upon all who heard the stern yet heeding appeal. It was an appeal from the lips of the fearless man, one who had won a record as a soldier in the Civil War and upon the frontier as an Indian fighter. It was a demand for one who would risk almost certain death to save a couple of hundred of his fellow beings, among them a score of women and children, from the hands of cruel savages. Around the fort, beyond the carrying of the rifles, yet full view, was a belt of red warriors, outnumbering the bright of defenders 5-1. It was a desperate situation, for Fort Advance was created in the heart of the western wilds of the Indian country. Help from their comrades was 40 miles away at the next military post. Of course, several brave men had attempted to run the deadly gauntlet and had died before their eyes, all in the fort. Such was the situation, and another attack was threatened at any moment from the Redskins. The ammunition was growing low. Something must be done. So the appeal of the gauntlet commander had been made. Had it been made in vain? It would seem so, for not a man moved forward to answer the appeal. Death seemed sure to result. It would but be in another life thrown away. Better all should die together. Look there! The crying rang like a trumpet from an officer on the watchtower. All eyes were stained in the direction he pointed. A horseman was riding like the wind toward the fort. He was leading a pack horse. The Indians seemed as much surprised at his appearance as were the whites. So splendidly mounted he certainly was, and a pack horse flying along by his side was a racer as well, for they came on like deer. For whence had the man come? Who was he? How he gotten almost through the Indian lines undiscovered? He certainly had done so, for no shot, no arrows had been fired at him until he was discovered by the officer on the watchtower of the fort. Then it was that he was seen to spur forward like the wind. He was heading directly for the large gates of the stockade fort, and he had chosen well his place to break through the Indian death circle was evident, for there were few braves near him, and he was upon a ridge that sloped to the valley across which lay the fort on a high hill heavily timbered. Along the ridge he sped, his rifle turned to the left, then to the right, firing from the right and left shoulder with the same ease. When he pulled the trigger, his bullet did not miss its mark. The rifle rang out a death knell, or sent a wounded brave out of action. The ponies of the Indians were feeding in the valley, and on only one guard here and there were no mounted warriors near too close in any on him or his head of or ahead of him. Hark! The maiden yelled, at the dread of the escape of the daring man, were fearful to hear. They were in frenzy of rage at the desperate act of the horsemen. Rifles and bows sent bullets and shafts at him, but at long range. If he was hit, he did not show it. His horse still thundered on alongside the ridge, and down toward the valley he sped, as recklessly as a frenzy of buffalo. He can never make it. The Indian guards are driving their ponies to bar his way. Who is he? How he rides! God guard the brave fellow! Such were the cries that came from the officers of the fort. Other cries came from the men. The women had dropped onto their knees onto the ground. Pray God to spare the splendid fellow who was daring the gauntlet of death. He was showing those in front of the fort that he was so daring to do what others had shrunk from, all at the call of the volunteers. Why does he not leave his pack horse? Cried the officer. Then the commandant called out, Captain Keyes, take your troops to the rescue of that brave fellow. With pleasure, sir. With pleasure, sir. I was going to ask it, was the cheery reply. The bugle sounded, only to be deadened by a wild roar from 200 voices in the cheer, following the cry of an officer who had a glass to his eye. It is Buffalo Bill, the Border King. Chapter 2, The Volunteer. The wild cheers that greeted the recognition of the daring gauntlet runner came in an almost frenzy of roars. The piping voices of the children and the treble notes of the women and the deep bass of the men mingling in one grand, swelling, inspiring chorus. The Border King, as he had been called, heard the sound. He understood that it was for him, and he waved his hat and his broad sombrero and came on at the same mad pace. Buffalo Bill, the Border King, was chief of scouts at that very fort, and he was the hero of all who knew him. As chief of the scouts at the post, he was always scouting around to tell of danger to the defenders. A week before, he had started for Denver with important dispatch, but had returned in a half a day, report signs of large bands of Indians about, and then he had again gone on the trail. The danger he dreaded was real, and surrounding of the fort several days later had shown. Scouts had been sent for aid, but not one had gotten through the death belt surrounding the fort. The belt of merciless humanity was tightening. Easily an hour, ammunition was giving out, and all realized the world would be done if help did not come. And now Buffalo Bill, the Border King, he was seemingly coming from the sunshine of the the wilderness into the shadow of death. Why did he do it? The question none could answer. Well, that he was coming gave a ray of hope. All knew that the great man of the plains had did this to win his name as king among the mighty men of the borderland, for such men were heroes of the noblest. What could he do now to help them in their great need? That was the question, but all hoped that he could do much. All felt the better for his coming. Major Frank Baldwin's face wore a pleased look. He had known William F. Cody as scout long and well. He knew all that he was capable of. A border boy reared in the shadow of death, an Indian fighter from his 10th year, the hero of hundreds of daring deeds, thrilling adventures, and narrow escapes. Gentle as a woman, yet savage in battle as a mountain lion, he had won the title of his comrades and had bestowed upon him, and his coming to the fort now was worth the company of reinforcements. Never mind, Keys, for it's Cody, and he will get through, called out Major Baldwin to Captain Keys, and his men were mounting. Captain Edward L. Keyes was a splendid type of cavalry officer, and he was anxious for a brush with the Redskins at close quarters. He was disappointed, but as a man was known to be Buffalo Bill, he greeted with Major Baldwin that he would get through. And in fact, the Border King had turned his repeating rifle upon the Indian guards who were trying to head him off by blocking his way with a large herd of ponies. His rifle rattled forthly, lively, yet deadly music, and his was a wonderfully true for a man riding at full speed. Then the empty rifle was swung at his back, and with a revolver in each hand, the daring scout began to fairly narrow a path through the herd of ponies, which quickly broke before him and stampeded ahead of him. Another wild cheer from the soldiers arose, for the herd of ponies were being driven directly towards the big gates of the fort. Out of the line, get out of the line of them. Throw up the gates, commanded Major Baldwin. The soldiers obeyed, Captain Keyes and his troop, stretching out in two lines to receive them. In vain did the Indian guards try to head off the stampede. By placing their ponies in the valley where the grass is plentiful, they were caught in their own trap. Buffalo Bill had outwitted them. Into the fort dashed hundreds of ponies to be corralled. Close upon their heels came the Border King, still dragging his pack horse. On guard, all four of the Indians will charge on foot and follow their ponies in. The voice of Buffalo Bill reached every ear. Major Baldwin at once ordered all his men to their posts of duty, while a cheer followed the Border King's word. Strip the pack horse. I have brought you ammunition. God bless you, Cody. For those words you have saved us, cried Major Baldwin. And there was a tremor in the voice of the brave officer as he glanced towards the group of women and children. Then the major, as he wrung the scout's hand, said, "In the name of the Rockies, where did you get this ammunition?" Well, then the major had from where I hid it, sir, over a year ago. There's enough to stand you until aid comes, for you have sent for it. Of course, sir. Sent at last, but 5 men have died in the attempt, was the sad response. Buffalo Bill's face assumed a look of anxiety, a look not often seen there. I called for another volunteer when we discovered you were coming. It was a splendid dash and a desperate one for you to make, Cody. I will make it again, sir, for we must have help, was the determined response of the Border King. Well, there we go. The Redskin King of the Sioux, Chapter 3. I think I can do one more chapter. Hardly had Buffalo Bill uttered the hopeful words that thrilled all who heard him, and he would go for help, ride once more through the death gauntlet, where the warning cries arose that the Indians were coming in great force, and from all quarters, all afoot, save a few chiefs here and there who had picked up stray ponies from the herd. The ammunition brought on the pack horse, led by Buffalo Bill, was hastily distributed among the defenders with orders to throw no shot away, to shoot to kill. Powder was too precious and devoted band as gold dust, and bullets were as valuable as diamonds. Major Baldwin took his position at the watchtower, Buffalo Bill by his side, repeating rifle in hand, and near them stood a couple of young officers as aides, and the bugler. All were armed with rifles, and every weapon for which there was no man was loaded, and every man was loaded and ready. The women of the fort were two groups, one to reload weapons, and the other to aid the surgeon with the wounded. The Indians came swarming up the valley like a red tidal wave. They were measuring their circle and expected to rush over the stockade walls in a cyclonic charge. They quickened their pace as they came, then began their weird, wild, appalling war cries. With a bound, were in a rush, sending showers of arrows and a hail of bullets as they came on. It was a grand charge to look upon. It was a desperate one to check. The men had their orders and obeyed them. Not a rifle cracked until the deep boom of 4 or 6 powder guns belched forth their thundering discharge of iron death shots. The volley upon the volley of carbine, rifle, repeating rifle, and musket followed. It became incessant, and thunder of the big guns broke savagely into the fearful chorus. And the cheers of the fort defenders, the wild snorting of the corralled herd of Indian ponies, and the demoralizing yells of the redskins made very hell on earth. Above all rose the notes of the bugle, sending forth orders at Major Baldwin's command, and now and then the piercing, weird, wild war cry of the Border King was heard. And well did the charging Indians know the battle call of the white chief they called Pahaska, Long Hair. But Indian nature was not equal to face the deadly hail of iron and lead, and the red wave broke against the hillsides, withered as through a death agony for a moment, then surged backward, slowly at first, then gathering speed in one mad stampede. It was a backward flow of the mighty red tidal wave that had dashed upon the breakers of steel and iron and lead. It surged backwards, all save the many dead and a few wounded braves that remained on the hillside, and one mounted chief. It was Oakhart, the great leading chief, mounted upon a large white cavalry horse he had captured months before. The horse was determined to rejoin the whites, and he made a dash for the fort. In vain did Chief Oakhart try to check him. He would have thrown himself from the saddle could he have done so, but he had trapped himself by having bound his lariat around his body and the cavalry saddle he rode, that if wounded or killed, he would not be left on the field for his foe. He had lost his scalping knife and would not cut the rawhide lariat that held him fast. He wrenched, doubtless, swore, or cavalry rode it field to his foe. He had lost his scalping knife and could not cut the rawhide lariat that held him fast. He withered, doubtless, swore in choicest Indian lingo, yelped like a wounded coyote, all in vain as he tugged at the reins and the lariat. He could not check the horse nor unfasten the lariat. His Indian braves saw this terrible position and rushed back to try to rescue him. Buffalo Bill had been first to see the scrape into which the chief had gotten himself, and had run down from the watchtower, throwing himself upon his still-saddled claybank scouting horse, Buckskin, shouted for the gate to be open and dashed out toward Oakhart. Another moment, and the Border King was by himself, side by side with the Indian chief, his revolver held at the head, one hand on his other hand grasping the reins of the splendid white horse, and in spite of the fire of the group of redskins rescuers, he was forcing his prisoner toward the open gate of the fort. A fire from the artillery quickly sent the would-be redskin rescuers reeling back to cover. The next morning into the stockade dashed the Border King with his native, the Oak Heart, the Red King of the Sioux. The cheers were deafening, and that greeted the heroic scout, and the Major Baldwin was there to welcome the scout. A warm hand grasp, and the words, "Another great deed for your credit, Buffalo Bill." It was cleverly done, and he turned to the scout, whom the scout was freeing from the turned to the Indian, who the scout was freeing from the lariat that had been cause of his capture. The Redskin King of the Sioux proved worthy of his title. His face was emotionless, and his look and full of fearlessness and savage dignity. He had been captured, humbled in the eyes of his braves, thousands of braves, but he was definitely still in fear of his foes and would not revel in his heart anguish. "Now, Major Baldwin, I am ready to make the thorough aid," said Buffalo Bill, with perfect cool, turning from the Indian chief to the commandant. All right, I think we're going to cut it there. Next chapter, Buffalo Bill's plot. So chapter 4 is next. And I hope you'll all join me for part 2 of Buffalo Bill stories. Sounds exciting, doesn't it? Yes, 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 it does. So anyway, Buffalo Bill stories coming right up. I hope you're all enjoying this. Sure am I doing it, I tell you. Some of this is a little bit hard because the page is cut off there, but we're making the best of it. You know, these kinds of pages haven't been read for over 100 years, and you're getting them hear them right here. Stories from the Old West. Okay, remember, I hope you enjoyed this. Just go out, be the frequency you want to receive, everyone. I love you all. Peace, everybody.